So I'm joined today by Rhiannon Di Martino. Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, Emma.
We have got a lot to talk about today, and we were just laughing before I hit record. So many of the topics that I talk about and kind of get on my soapbox about. So I'm really excited to get into some of those around kind of purpose and taking control of your career. But before we get into kind of the meat of it, Rhi, do you perhaps want to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, a bit of an overview of your career to date?
Sure can. Rhi, and my career started where I had an emerging interest in sales and marketing. Didn't really know what it was about, but I actually had a friend in high school whose mother was working in sales and marketing. And I thought, this sounds a bit interesting, not knowing a whole lot about it. And so that's kind of where my career started through work experience, actually. So I did 2 work experience gigs in high school, actually in big global brands. I was really fortunate, actually. So I got to do 2 placements in a global pharmaceutical organization and in a global trucking organization. So very different, but gave me some good exposure to what this whole sales and marketing thing was actually about. And what I learned through that is that it is both creative, but then also quite strategic and operational. I thought, you know what, I don't have an idea of what other things I could potentially do in my studies. So this sounds pretty good, and that's sort of the path I took in terms of my first university studies. So I did a double degree in communications and business marketing. Did that for 4 years, and pretty much got straight into full-time work after that. This was in the early 2000s. So it was at a time where internet was kind of still new and emerging, really. And so my first gig was in web design. And so where my career started was actually in a tech startup. That was at a time where tech startups and the probably cultures that are acceptable today was a little bit different back then, and some of the behaviours were...
That's a nice euphemism, isn't it? It's a little bit different, yeah.
A bit different. And whilst I loved it in terms of the organisation I was working with, I was doing like client services and content development, actually. And one of their big clients was they were a talent management agency for a lot of big high-profile Australian sporting stars. So, the downside was some of the environment that I was working was a little chaotic in this startup, but I got to work with some fabulous clients, including Kathy Freeman, which wasn't too long after she ran her gold at the Sydney Olympics. So, I mean, that was pretty exciting for someone young, early in their career to work with the likes of Kathy. But I didn't stay for that long. I wasn't loving the environment, as I said. And so I moved on from that, and then almost had the polar opposite experience. I moved into automotive services, but into an organisation that had an amazing culture. And it was a really great learning ground for early career, where I had some great managers and mentors. I was in a marketing role, and they kept throwing more and more work my way, more and more stretch opportunities. And I kind of relished that and took on more responsibility. And sort of by my mid-20s, I was leading a marketing team there. So only a small marketing team, but it gave me an opportunity to get my first runs on the board in terms of a leadership role. So for a while, and really liked it. And then, as you do, kind of got to 5 years of doing that, and I had itchy feet again, and decided to try a completely new sector. And went into property development. Didn't know a lot about property development, thought it would be okay to work in shopping centres. That's what I thought I was doing anyway when I went across to property development. Actually wasn't what I was doing, but I got my foot in the door there, and I loved that sector. I stayed in property development in various capacities, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But started off there in marketing, and it was a really, really high achieving, high performance environment I found myself in. Really highly educated people generally who work in property development, and I loved it. It was sometimes male dominated, so and so was the industry I'd come from before then. So as a young woman early in career, also it gave you exposure to sometimes things that were pushing you a little out of your comfort zone, but was a really good, again, learning ground of working with very different people and kind of evolving those leadership skills. So I stayed in marketing roles there for quite some time, moved up into national type marketing roles. And then I started to have some things going on in my personal life, which becomes relevant. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but I started to have a bit of anxiety. had a lot going on outside of work. Um, and that was kind of something that was present in my 20s, manageable, but something that was definitely part of my life. And then I had my first child in my early 30s, and again, working for an incredible organisation. They're really supportive for me to step away from work. But during that period, my anxiety got worse. I didn't have what you would describe as the kind of idyllic baby that just slept and ate. It was a difficult period,
Do
actually.
they actually exist, or is that is that
My
just a
friends
myth?
frustratingly have those babies, but it was not the baby that I have. And so I found myself with postnatal depression during that period as well. And so it was a bit of a life defining moment for me while I was on parental leave, in that, I knew that I definitely wanted to go back to career, but I really started to question that maybe there was more than what I was doing prior to going on leave, even though that I loved it. And I was probably on a path at that point to my next probably career move was to move into like a GM of marketing type role. And I really started to question, was that what I actually wanted? Anyway, my period of parental leave ended, and a lot had changed in the 12 months that I had been off on leave. And my role had been restructured. And so I went back into a whole new team, a whole new manager, at a different part of the organization. But it came with some great opportunities. I moved into a role which was less about actually working in the business and rather working on the business. So it was a national marketing operations type role for a very large marketing team, 150 marketers around the country. And the
Wow.
challenge at that point that I was working with the GM of marketing at the time on was taking a very decentralized marketing team, all dotted around the country, regional areas, and we wanted to centralize the capability of that team. And it was also at a time where digital skills were becoming much more needed, and a lot of those traditional marketing skills and traditional channels were starting to fall away. So we had this challenge around, we had great marketers, but we really needed to evolve what their capabilities and their skills were. And we also needed to create quite a big change culturally in the way that the team was working. So that was sort of my first push into that space around actually thinking about how people work with each other, and doing that on a larger scale than just my immediate team, which, had up until that point only been a handful of people. And I loved it. And I loved working on with the culture part and building up capability and helping people thrive, and then helping teams thrive, and then helping the organization thrive. And so I did that for a while. And that was a brand new role. It hadn't existed before. And I found that I loved that. I loved going into what I'd call like a startup role where it hadn't been done before, and I had a blank canvas. And I actually seemed to do it quite well. And so not before long, I had another opportunity to do a similar thing where I could see a different opportunity somewhere else in the business, which was to really build up an innovation function for the organisation. And I moved across to do that. So I stood up the innovation function, and again was looking to embed innovation as a capability for the organisation, and I loved that. It was lots of working with senior stakeholders. It was a lot about influencing. It was about, putting in ways of thinking and capability, and just exposed me to different things that I had done prior to that. Did that for quite some time, I think 18 months or so. And then was really starting to think about that capability, culture, people had sort of become the areas I was most interested in. And I'd been in this organization for some time at that point. And something that had been a focus for me was advocates across the organization. So having people that knew what I liked to do, what I wanted to do, the path I thought that I wanted to go on, who were kind of looking for opportunities. I didn't really even know that they were looking for opportunities on my behalf. But I, at that point in time, started some conversations around maybe I move out of marketing. Maybe I actually do something more with this culture work and this capability stuff. And maybe I could do more of that actually if I was in a people or culture type function. And so it wasn't too long before, again, that opportunity presented itself where there were a few roles. I had to think about which role might interest me the most. And that was also at a time where inclusion or diversity and equity was a fairly emerging area, and had an opportunity to move across into people and culture and take on a diversity and inclusion role. It was a big adjustment, going from being someone who's quite senior in one technical discipline in marketing and being thrown into people and culture, but then also in a diversity and inclusion role, which I really had no idea about. But I had the scaffolding around me that I needed to succeed. I had a great manager, who knew what he was getting himself in for when he put me in that role, and I would need a little bit of time to be able to kind of perform in that role. He gave me the exposure I needed, and something that I'm very well known for is my curiosity. I ask so many questions, and that's what I did to kind of get myself grounded and embedded in that role. And I loved it. And I loved that work because it's really purposeful. You've got the purpose component because you are influencing, again, the culture of an organization to embed inclusive ways of working and inclusive ways of working with each other. But actually at the heart of that are people who to work on amazing things like domestic and family violence, and how an organization can play a role at a societal level if we can provide that support to our people, the kind of changes that can help create across a community. I got to help individuals who were coming out in the workplace around their sexuality for the very first time, didn't know how to do that. And so this was, for me, a real eye-opener around there's just some amazing work that you can do. For me, was more than kind of shareholder returns. And I was really drawn to that. I love that. And I did that role for some time. And as I succeeded in that role, my portfolio got bigger. I took on employee engagement, and I took on employer branding, early careers, and a lot of things in the OD space, and loved it. But I had then been in that organisation for like almost 12 years, and it was time to do something else. And the urge I had to do something more purposeful was growing, and that's where the kind of intersect of the things that had happening for me personally around mental health and the anxiety and the postnatal depression that I had. And I should have also mentioned I did do some study on the side during that, kind of in my own time, which gave me a qualification, which is a Cert 4, but it gave me some exposure to coaching, particularly wellness coaching. And so I just thought, I want to bring all of this together and I want to do something more with this. I didn't quite know what that looked like, but I just started talking to people, and started putting it out there in the universe around, where could I take this? It wasn't too long before I saw an opportunity in a well-known mental health organisation, and I didn't love the sound of the role. And I actually had convinced myself not to put myself forward because I thought, I'm not interested in this role. I am interested in the organisation. But I did. I still put my application in, and I didn't think I'd hear much because it clearly wasn't a match for the role. But they clearly saw something, got me in. We had a conversation. No, it wasn't the right role. But I met the CEO through that process, and we just had a connection. I didn't realize it at the time, but they had the connection on their end as well, and we just stayed in touch. And it wasn't too long. I think it was only like 6 or 8 weeks before they reached out again, and a new different opportunity presented itself. And so that's kind of how I transitioned from what had been quite commercial type organisations into the not-for-profit sector, and then really in a different area in mental health. This was just prior to the pandemic. So this was in January of 2020 that I moved across, which was a really crazy time to then be learning something new in mental health with, all that was to come. But I loved it. And I moved into a transformation type space in that organisation, and loved that there was lots of great work that they were trying to do to benefit the community. It was chaotic because we were trying to drive a lot of very significant change in a time where people's lives were so disrupted. I loved that, and did the transformation stuff for a little while, did some more P&C stuff, and then again sort of had this sliding door moment where I was contemplating moving on from the organisation. There was a restructure, and looking back then, I worked with a career coach actually at the time, and this was only last year, and started to dissect the periods in my career where I'd been the happiest and most energized, and identified where those things were, and started to kind of chart a course around where I thought I wanted to go and what I wanted to do next. And I'd built up a very, very diverse portfolio of skills and roles in that period of time, and had worked out that I wanted to do something that leveraged those. I'd hit a couple of stumbling blocks when I went out and spoke to recruiters about taking all of those skills and packaging them up, because I'm not a nice, neat package around, this is my specialisation. I've got lots of different specialisations, if you like. But identified that I thought I wanted to do a chief of staff type role next. And that's what I'm doing now. And have only been doing that role for around 6 months, but it has just aligned beautifully with being able to take a really diverse bunch of experiences and skills and different sectors, and being able to use that in a way that's, supporting the senior leadership group in the organisation, but being able to draw on, and I'm feeling really energised about the different things that I can bring to that role.
Wow.
A lot.
I almost don't know where to start because there's so many things that I want to ask you about. Going to start with, what do you think it was about the organisation, and primarily the property development organisation, because that was that sort of first exposure to doing something different and going into a role that you hadn't done before? What do you think it was about the organisation, the culture of that organisation, the structure even, that supported that type of, as you said, sort of greenfield, almost kind of startup type of opportunities for you? Can you sort of put your finger on how they were able to make that work?
Yeah, I think they really believed in their talented people, and they had a great program around their talent and making sure that they did everything that they could to retain their people in the organization. Yeah. So I think, from a formal perspective, they're the sorts of things that they had in place, that they wanted to keep great people there, and therefore were always thinking about, probably 2 years was the maximum to keep someone in a role, if you wanted to retain them in the organisation, because they knew that they would need to move them on to sort of prevent you from then looking externally to the organisation. So, that's smart in terms of that. But I also think that they had great leaders. Like, they had people who just backed their people. And that is consistent throughout my career. I've had, and I hope that I do that for my people too, that just backed their people in. If someone was suggesting that they were keen on an opportunity, they would rather invest on someone internal of the organisation to give them a go in that regard than, necessarily bringing someone external into the organisation to do that. And so, I think there's some of the things, and again, also great learning support. So that scaffolding that I sort of talked about, when people were going into kind of greenfield sites, really thinking about what would they need to help them succeed versus kind of flounder in the role. But I would say that whilst they had that, and this has also always been my experience, that it always comes back, though, to the individual. Like, the individual, it always has to drive their career. You don't have to exactly know what that is, because I still don't. But you still got to be in the driver's seat to try to take it in a general direction, because no one else on your behalf.
Talking my language there, Ray, talking my language. And I really liked your point around curiosity, because I think it sounds like such a simple thing. Be curious, ask questions, but it's such a fundamental behavior. And I think it can actually change so much in your life if you just kind of embody that of, well, I wonder what would happen. I wonder what would happen if I had a conversation with this person. I wonder what would happen if I asked this question. Could I do that? Why not? I've got some great transferable skills, and just that sort of thought process, I think, can carry you a long way. Obviously, you need the skills and the drive to kind of back that up. But as a starting point, I think it's so important and actually really overlooked often.
I agree. And people are really happy to answer questions. So,
that always surprises me. Yeah, I think people don't do it because they're worried about what the response will be. But my experience is the same as yours, that most people are like, oh, great. Yeah, how can I help? And it's this very open, positive kind of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And people generally are really, really happy to help, and actually feel really valued if they can play a very small part in giving you any kind of advice or support or assistance, connecting you with somebody else, whatever it might be, an insight. People are very gracious and very happy to share that. The courage really just needs to be you initiating that, or you asking that question, or you reaching out, I think is just the initial first part.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned that really kind of rang true for me was that not needing to know from the outset exactly what it's going to look like. You don't necessarily need to know what the final step is. You don't even need to know sometimes what you're actually asking for, because you might not have got there yet. It's just that kind of first step to say, what do you think this could look like? Is there an opportunity here? And I think that's another thing that sometimes holds people back, that they feel they either need to know the answer themselves, or they need to have a really clearly defined idea of what that, thing might be before they initiate the conversation or before they ask the question. So it was great to hear you say, I didn't really know. I was just, kind of exploring and kind of figuring
Yeah.
it out as I went along.
Yeah, 100%. And I was always reasonably confident to be vulnerable around that. So I didn't feel like I had to know all of the answers or have all the answers or know exactly what needed to happen. And in fact, I think in, several of those roles where I moved into a space that I didn't know, I was very upfront with that I am not the expert here. I am learning, and people appreciate that better than coming in kind of chest beating and thinking, and purporting to have all the answers. People would prefer that more vulnerable approach as you are learning and getting up to speed.
And I also think it's quite liberating because it frees you up to have those types of conversations and not have that kind of, probably fear almost of, oh my God, I'm going to get found out. Like they're going to realize I don't know, as opposed to leading with, I'm learning, I'm figuring this out. Let's work it out together. Changes that whole dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. And I got more comfortable with that over time. So like once I knew that I'd done it once where I stepped into greenfield type roles, and saw that I actually could work out a way to kind of be able to turn nothing into a something, and actually knew that that's where I got my greatest energy. And then getting feedback from people who could see things that I couldn't see. Because at that point in time, you don't know how you're going. When you're kind of in the thick of that, you're actually probably, I would have had a whole lot of self-doubt. But getting that feedback around, well, how am I going? And you're doing well. It just gives you more confidence to keep going. And then I knew that once I'd done it once, that actually I loved it, got energy from it, seemed to do it okay. And then I put myself out there more to be able to do those sorts of things again.
It's so interesting because I think that exact thing of being able to do something or being able to take on something that you haven't done before is such a key skill, but it's quite an intangible skill. And going back to your point about, it was difficult sometimes for recruiters to know, what box to put you in, essentially. Your key strength, I would imagine, is that skill. It is that being able to take something that you haven't done before, figure it out, make it happen and deliver it, which is, so valuable to an organization, but quite hard to define on a CV or on a piece of paper. Whereas the other thing you said that I thought was really interesting was having advocates around the business, and they would be the people saying, oh, actually, you should talk to Rhea about this because, she came into a role in our part of the business, never done it before, got up and running and delivered some really great work. So I think that's another kind of key part of the story of kind of how you build that.
Yeah, and I still think that's important and something that I still continue to focus on. And whether they be advocates or people in your network inside the organization where you are, or people that you hopefully I've managed to keep connections with outside the organization as well as I've moved around, you just know that they're the people that you can kind of turn to, and that they will be advocating on your behalf when you're not present, and also just looking for opportunities, and might just come to you and say, hey, I saw this, would this be something that would be of interest to you? So and then you reciprocate and you do the same for your network as well. And again, people are really happy to do that and be that. And often they don't even know that's what they're doing. They're doing it based on the work done together previously, and the trust and the rapport that you've built through whatever that that shared connection that you've got.
You touched on it there, and I'm interested to sort of delve down on that. When you are going into a new role, you said something along the lines of, oh, I have the confidence, or I found the confidence to deliver it, or maybe there was that bit of doubt, but I just kind of ignored it and did it anyway. I'd imagine there would be a lot of people listening to your story, and that would be the question probably in their minds of, we all at various times have various degrees of kind of imposter syndrome. But if you're continuously doing things that you haven't done before, then that must be quite acute, because you haven't done it. You're figuring it out. You are in that sense that, you know, kind of quote unquote imposter in that
Yeah.
scenario. Did
Yeah.
you find that? Did you feel that? How did you, and if you did, how did you deal with it?
Definitely. So I think it's just human, and everybody feels that self doubt at different periods. Certainly felt that. I think the things that I did to manage that were I had people that I could talk to that were in the workplace with me that could kind of see what I could see and could provide someone just to talk to kind of share my fears, allay my fears. Someone that wasn't directly my manager that I could then have that conversation with. So that's important. I think that's important and was certainly something to help me. And then I think talking to others. So in the property development organization, there were other leaders that would be open about that thing, that the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome is a real thing, and it doesn't matter how senior you are in the organization. It's real for all of us, you know, even at the CEO level. So kind of normalize that a little bit. And I think, as I said before, as I had done it once, it just gave me confidence that I can make sense of things. And a lot of that comes down to my judgment skills. I don't even know how I've developed those, but that's something I get told often, that I've got really good judgment skills. And so that just helps me just assess where things are at, what might need to happen, test that with others, constantly kind of bouncing to know if what I'm doing is meeting the expectations of what people think needs to happen, what success looks like, and having a clear picture, therefore, of what that is. So if I understand what the outcome needs to be, I can then help fill in the gaps of like how we get from where we are to, if I understand what the outcome is. So that's probably the other thing that gives me the confidence when I'm in a space that I don't know, of just what's on the horizon, like kind of what's the North Star that I'm aiming towards. And if that wasn't clear for me in a role, I would need to ask a lot of questions to be able to
Mhm.
understand what that was, so I knew what it was that I was aiming towards.
Yeah, I love that point, and I think it's so true that that sort of normalizing that, you know, I think there's that tendency to think, well, if I'm, you know, feeling that imposter syndrome, I'm the only one. Like no one else feels like that. Everyone else has got it figured out, and I'm just the one over here going, "Oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing." But it's not true. Like
100%.
everyone feels that way at some point in time. And I would go as far as to say the ones that say they haven't are probably lying,
Money.
because I just think, like you said, it's just innate kind of human nature to have that sense. I heard something the other day, and it really kind of resonated with me around this, of because I think, you know, when we talk about imposter syndrome, the sense is that it's a negative thing, that it's something that we should be trying to get rid of. And I heard this reframe, which I absolutely loved, that actually it's a signal that you're doing something that you haven't done before, that you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, that you're trying something different, that you're growing. You know, congratulations, like great, like that's actually the goal. So instead of, you know, this thing that we should be scared of, or trying to avoid, it's actually a signal to tell us that we're going in the right direction. And I loved that. I thought it was really, yeah, just really kind of shifted away from being something that was, you know, all negative, or, you know, to great, like awesome. You know, it's a positive signal.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is. It's those moments of uncomfortable, where you're uncomfortable and the terror, and they're like, what am I doing? It's usually where you get the most growth
Yeah,
and learn.
exactly.
I think the key is to not let it paralyze you. I guess that's what I would say,
Yes.
and know how to then
Yeah.
push through, and be able to come out the other side.
Yeah, and finding, and that's probably going to be a little bit different for everyone, isn't it? But I think, you know, again, your example of having that sort of support network internally that you can go to and say, you know, this is what I'm thinking. Am I on the right lines? You know, even having, I was having a conversation someone with recently, and even having, you know, we've all got those kind of cheerleaders in our lives that are the people we can ring and go, just need a bit of a pep talk. I just need you to tell me that I can do this.
Yeah.
And, you know, 5 minutes of that and you're like, yeah, I'm back. I can do it. Yeah, just having that
Yeah.
kind of, as you said, scaffolding and kind of support network, whatever that might look like for the individual, I think is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think also 100% agree. And not being afraid. I think some people sometimes fear kind of admitting that vulnerability to their manager. And I would hope that you could be able to share with your manager that you're feeling a little out of your comfort zone, because they're really the very important feedback loop that you have around is what you're doing, what it is that they need you to do, want you to do. Is it taking you in the direction that what needs to be delivered? So, that kind of feedback loop with the leader that you're reporting to, I think is really important, because you're going to get the signals there around do more of or do less of. So it's having the confidence that if your manager is not necessarily providing that to you, or as much as you need, that you need to ask for that feedback, so you are getting the feedback that you need to know to do more or less.
It goes back to that overarching point, doesn't it, of you're the one driving, like you're the one in charge of it, and you know what you need to be able to kind of succeed, and kind of having, as you said, that confidence to say, okay, I'm missing this little bit here, let's talk about that. Am I hitting what I'm meant to be doing? And I say confidence, I don't know if that's the right word, but just maybe it's even just knowing that that's a question that you can ask sometimes, and going back to that point of you being the one driving, and not just kind of passively sitting back and waiting for someone else to kind of take the lead on that stuff.
Yeah, agree, definitely.
The thing I wanted to delve into, and it's such a big question, but I'm really interested to get your take on it, is purpose, and something that's played a big part in your career and your life. And I think it's interesting, and I had the thought when you were talking about some of the mental health and anxiety, that I mean, it's very easy to say this in hindsight. I know at the time it's something very different, but it's often those kind of most difficult, kind of darkest times, I think, that can, in hindsight, provide the most clarity. Certainly been the same in my own life. I had my own kind of health issues about 5 years ago, and I almost think of my life as kind of a before and after that, because it changed so much of how I think about things.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how you experienced it as well?
Yeah, mine was yes and no. It was definitely, like I said, that was something that was happening, and it gave me a new perspective, I suppose, around mental health, but then also how you navigate life when you're not feeling your best.
Yeah.
How you show up and still do all the things you need to do even when you're not feeling your best. And that kind of, though, coincided with like different life stage of becoming a parent as well. And so I think both of those things at the same time just made me really question about, like, did I really want to be a GM of marketing and work 70 hours a week and not see my young family? And would I be fulfilled? Like, would I wake up happy to do that every day? And yeah, the mental health stuff. And then the stuff, as I was describing, that I did when I was, managing the diversity and inclusion portfolio, which just gave me a appreciation around, things like domestic and family violence and how you can really make a difference to somebody else's life. And for me, it was kind of just a whole series of things that just, I had to listen to my intuition. My intuition was saying to me, and that's something that also still very strongly do, is that I don't let my head overrule what I feel inside. And everything inside me was saying, there's work out there. There's more meaningful things that you could be doing that you would feel fulfilled. But also, when you get to the end of your, working career, hopefully I will look back and say, I've been able to contribute to some really good things here, and hopefully been able to impact, some of the people and some of the, people in the community through the work that I've been able to deliver. So, yeah, it was probably just a series of different things that kind of all came together in a period of a few years that I thought, it's just more that I could be doing here. And then just finding the courage to then step out of what I was doing to do, something different.
Yeah, I think, and this sounds very simplistic, but I think it can actually lead to some of those kind of thought processes. Just kind of asking yourself what's actually important to you, and what success actually looks like to you, and kind of really working through those ideas. And like you said, if I'm sitting there 70 hours a week as a GM of marketing, well, what does that mean for my life? by some measures of success, I'm doing great. I've got this big job. I've, presumably got the salary that goes along with that. People would say successful. But if those aren't the things that are important to you, if those aren't the things that you're actually measuring against, then that's not success. Success might look like something quite different. And as you said, success might be more defined by what you can give back to others and
Yeah.
helping people, and things that are probably a little bit more difficult to define, certainly in a working sense, but knowing that those things kind of need to underpin what you ultimately want to do.
Yeah. And I think so, like there were the life events that happened for me, but then I mentioned briefly that I did that additional study around life coaching. And through that process, to become a qualified coach, you also have to be coached. And so I worked, because you practice on each other, essentially. That's part of the learning approach. And so I got to have a coach for a period of time. And that was really helpful for me to also find some answers. And so I would absolutely, if you are grappling with, you kind of have a feeling, but you don't know what's next. What does purpose look like for you? How do you find that? Because it'll, like you said, Emma, be different for everybody. There are amazing people out there that can help you go through a bit of a thinking process to be able to kind of work through that. And so I would strongly recommend, I think it's money well invested if you've got someone that you can work with that is a coach in that area. If you're not sure and it's something you want to explore further, you don't have to find all the answers on your own, is I guess what I'm suggesting, that there are others out there that can help you kind of through that.
And I think sometimes it can often just be as simple as, when it's you, it's just so much harder to see. You almost can't see the wood for the trees when it's you. When it's another person, actually, often if you don't know the person, it's much simpler, because it's often much clearer in the words that they're saying, and just that kind of outside perspective. And as you said, kind of, just different kind of questions, and kind of working out, so what would that look? It goes back to that curiosity point, so what would that look like? And, if that was that, how would that make you feel? And kind of working through some of those things. Going back to your point there about having done the course, that was something else that I wanted to ask you about. When you were taking on these kind of various different new roles, and having to learn new skills, and learn quite rapidly, did you have sort of a set process for that, or how would you go about learning new skills in each of these kind of new roles?
I mean, this is going to sound cliche, but it's kind of coming back to, like, what does your 90-day plan look like? And the 90-day plan isn't just about the work. It's about how you act. For me, it was about actually what did I need to learn in those 90 days, as well as what I had to deliver. And so I always kind of work to that. So I've kind of got my own personal 90 days and then the work 90 days. And that would then give me a bit of a path to make sure that I was either, connecting with people that kind of build that knowledge for me. I don't prescribe to doing lots of formal courses and those sorts of things. I actually think some of the best learning is, as I've demonstrated, it's just on the job. So I didn't do a lot of formal courses as I went into new areas. It was more just exposure to people who might have done that role before, people who were doing that role in another organization. So I just got more comfortable to reach out and say, hey, you're doing this role over here. I'm new.
Yeah.
Have a coffee, into their knowledge. And again, people, it's just constantly comes. People are really happy for you to just shout them a coffee and ask them some questions. And usually there's something that you can reciprocate, with, in terms of your knowledge or your experience as well. So a bit of that, but then, like I said, having a plan, having thought through what success looks like for what I need to do in the role and deliver in the role. But personally, what I needed that was going to give me the knowledge and the growing of that skill base that was going to give me what I needed to succeed in the role as well.
So interesting, that sort of, I guess it's, networking at the end of the day. But again, I think it's just something that people either shy away from because they feel uncomfortable about that outreach part of it, or I think the mistake that people can make is that they see that as something they do perhaps when they're looking for a new job, and they don't do it in the in-between periods of time, which I think is a huge miss for the exact reason that you've just given there, that
Yeah.
having people that you can kind of reach out to go, this person, as you said, like you can see on LinkedIn, it's one of the great things about LinkedIn. You can find these people really, really easily. Here's someone who's doing a similar role as me, who's been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years. They're going to know some stuff that I don't know yet. Like they're that much further down the road. And sending that person a message and saying, hey, as you said, can I buy you a coffee? I'd love to pick your brains on this if you've got half an hour or whatever.
I did it recently too when I identified that I thought I wanted to do a chief of staff type role, but I actually didn't know anyone who'd done a chief of staff role. So I just asked the people that I knew that I was working with, and I said, who's worked with the chief of staff before? And there were a couple of people, and I'm like, can you introduce me? And same thing, just went and took them out for coffee or lunch or whatever. And look, I'm not anywhere near as good at this as I should be. So the networking thing, I just ebb and flow, and there might be periods of a year where I'm doing none of it. So I'm not a great test case of how you should do it, but it has been documented.
But you're doing it, so that's already.
It has definitely been helpful when I've been thinking about doing something new, and like I said, people are really happy to be that person for you.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, because someone somewhere has already done it. So you can learn from that experience. Sure, you're going to put your own take your own spin on that, but you're not having to start from a completely blank sheet of paper. You can learn from that other person. And so it just seems like such a miss that more people don't do that. But I think it is that feeling of, I guess, essentially vulnerability and putting yourself out there, and what are they going to say? Are they going to say no? But the point I always go back to, or the response I've given that sense, is if someone sent you that message, what would you think? How would you respond? And people go, oh, well, I think that's really, and I think, oh, how nice. Yeah, great. Well, why would they be any different?
Yep, spot on. I think exactly the same thing. I'm always really happy if someone reaches out. I'm a little bit chuffed, to be honest, because I'm like, oh,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that they might be useful to them. So people feel the same way when you reach out to them. It's just that taking that first step to actually reach out. So you get fear to do that, I think.
Yeah. There's so much there. As I said at the start, I think for me, that sort of overarching point of you being the person in control and you being the driver, I would go as far as to say I think it is the most important thing that you can do to fundamentally change the course of your career, is that sort of shift from passive to I'm driving this, I'm in control. And sure, there's going to be times when you don't know and you need to reach out for help and all of those things. No one's saying that you have to have all of the answers, but being the driving force just makes, I think, kind of the ultimate difference. And you've just had so many great examples of that. So thank you very much for sharing all of those. Final question, Rhi. It's always the final question, and you've already shared a lot already, so that there may be a little bit of crossover, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. It's the what do you know now that you wish you knew then? Is there something that kind of stands out that if you'd known from the beginning, you think would have made a big difference to you?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, I've grappled with the whole needing to build a career as a specialist versus being comfortable that you can be a generalist and still have success in that path. So I think my older self would tell my younger self that you just don't have to have the traditional vertical career of jumping through the levels in one discipline. Actually, it can be a whole lot more fulfilling to just collect a whole lot of different experiences, and yourself that it's going to give you the experiences and the exposure you need to know then what the next step looks like. So I think that's the biggest thing that I think that is completely out the window now, of people having careers that they start, at a coordinator level and they work their way up the ladder. I think it's actually quite boring. So I think, that would be what I would tell myself, and what I knew then, that it's completely fine to do the zigzag, and it'll just give you more opportunities and more experiences to know what you then want to do next.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other point I would add to that is across industry as well, because that's the other one that still just refuses to die, this idea that you can't work across multiple industries. And to me, it's the exact same. It's actually the same point, that you're bringing different experiences with that. So yeah, I totally, unsurprisingly, I totally agree on that one.
Like progressive employers these days see past that. So, I'll be as bold as to say that if you're talking with someone and they are being very rigid around, you have to have come from that sector, that for me, that wouldn't be somebody that I'm interested in working for. Because
I agree. Yeah, it becomes self-selecting. Like, it's just not, that's not somewhere that you would want to be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rhea. I really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, I've absolutely loved it, and thank you so much for sharing what you've learned and your experience and insights. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I hope that, maybe there's one or two things in there that might be of value to others as well. So appreciate your time as well, Emma.